Hi there, my name is Ron Rogers, and this presentation is titled Bringing American Technology to Our Foreign Friends. Now, I had a request from my electrical engineering friends that I've kind of neglected here. I know that, I'm sorry, to talk a little bit more about some topics like this. So I'd like to talk about when I was lead engineer in the microwave technology group. Now, I was a pilot for United Airlines. I was furloughed, and so, I had to keep food coming into the table. So I had an electrical engineering background, and I initially worked for flight test at Cessna and Boeing, but I wanted to work as electrical engineer since I'd spent so much time studying it, and I figured I'd never had another chance. And here's my little Boeing pin, Boeing Military Aircraft Company. This was I was in industrial IPB3, industrial building something. This is back when Boeing actually had Boeing Military Aircraft Company in Wichita before they sold it to Spirit, so they could pretend they weren't responsible for problems. Did I say that out loud? Anyway, this was a very fun project, and that is a little sensor that went into the nose of a drone. It was a low frequency type of device. Lincoln Labs actually developed the antenna setup, and it was supposed to be used to get kind of a directional steer to an emitter. And because it's low frequency, low frequency antennas are large. They're a function of the wavelength. And so they, as you can see from this design, and those little, I think those are SMC connectors there. You get a little scale. It's a little bit over a foot. But they put a capacitive hat on the end of it there to increase the electrical length. And, when I was lead engineer in the microwave technology group, I actually had a physicist working for me who I would say, can we do this? Well, this was a bunch of PhDs at Lincoln Lab, and they put this thing together and basically told us, can you make this work? Because they basically did. And so we joked about that it takes a bunch of BS, Bachelor of Science, not what you typically think BS means, engineers to solve the problems of the PhDs. So we got this thing. And like I said, it was supposed to go into the nose of a drone. Now, this is back in the 80s, so this is a long time ago. Technology was a lot different back then. In fact, we were pushing the boundaries of technology quite a bit, and it was actually very enjoyable. I would get programs, and I'd say to my boss, we don't have the technology for this. And he says, develop it. So that was kind of interesting. And there's some interesting stories along that are declassified enough I can talk to them, and I probably will in future ones. But anyway, this was supposed to go into the nose of a drone. Now, I looked to see if I could find a picture of this. It was actually in Aviation Week published because the program was canceled. We were just one of the seeker heads, so it wasn't our fault. But it was canceled, and it looks sort of like this. It was launched from a little vehicle, and it had propellers in the back and stuff like that. But like I said, it didn't come to fruition. But the point of this thing was we were supposed to find these low frequency, and I know there's some high frequency stuff there. We were supposed to find these low frequency transmitter stations that were operated by our foreign friends, if you want to put it that way. Maybe people who weren't our friends as such. And the device was, the purpose of the sensor was to bring this drone with a explosive warhead to this vehicle and detonate it. Now, I should have been a little sensitive to this. You see, my dad was a forward air controller in World War II. That's him on the right there, and they've got this little radio, and of course they didn't have the technology back then to have these little drones out there hunting them, but, I should have been a little sensitive to that. But here is the drone sensor again. It's small, and the fun thing was, okay, we're trying to make this work. We're trying to take this guy out. Okay, I was a ham radio operator. A lot of the people in the electromagnetics section were actually hams, which is kind of interesting. I guess that's, the type of thing you kind of go to. If you like ham, you probably like being an electrical engineer, and we had a lot of them in the system. Now, the guy there you see, I don't have a good picture of Ed. Ed was an interesting guy. And see, I had come out of the Air Force, and I learned a lot of actually good management skills. And I really enjoyed being an engineer. And I enjoyed being a pilot, but I could have easily, if I couldn't have been a pilot, done this sort of work because I found this immensely interesting. In fact, on my last day leaving, I was 30 minutes leaving because I was talking to the various people in a project on my antenna, that strategic radar thing I talked about, how I accidentally doubled the accuracy. I was talking to them for a good 30 minutes. The other people were leaving and saying goodbye to me. My boss was waiting because he didn't want to leave before I did, but I still had some stuff to talk to him. And I had a guy set up take over for me, and they called back Monday and they said, "Oh, you want to be an airline pilot?" And they go, "Yeah, sure," because they know I tended to joke a little bit, and they said, "No, he really, really did." But anyway, I'm working with that. And with the management skills I got out of the Air Force dealing with people, Ed was an interesting guy to work with. He was very smart. He didn't suffer fools gladly, and he and I got along really well. And he wasn't in the main building with the other electrical engineers. He was up at the antenna lab up here where we did a lot of the antenna testing, and he had his own little desk up there, kind of by himself. He had some fuzzbuster radar detectors that he held the patent on. So he had a good little source of extra income. He had his own microwave lab at home, which is kind of interesting because even, back then, the instruments were pretty expensive. It's not like now where everything's digital and computer programming and you can get it quite cheaply. But anyway, Ed was interesting to work with. He didn't suffer fools gladly, and I had a high power microwave problem I was working, and he gave me the book, and I mentioned this in the other presentation, but he gave me the book, and I brought it back and said there was an error in the calculations, and he looked at me and goes, "Really?" And so I showed him my lab book, because you work a problem forward and backwards, and I said, "Yeah, it needs this term in the high power microwave handling," and he looks at me and says, "Yeah, they corrected that in edition 2." And so that was his little test of whether I was an engineer, I guess, worthy of him. And I guess a lot of guys didn't pass that test, and Ed didn't suffer fools gladly, but I worked with Ed. I had a lot of fun. And my boss said I needed to work with him on this project, so I said, okay. And my boss said, "Well, a lot of people have trouble working with Ed." And I go, "Well, I've been working with Ed for a while on various projects. I went to him as a source of knowledge." And he goes, "Oh." So anyway, this was a fun project because I would come up with an idea. I would kind of go home, and you know how you dream about stuff, and you come back next day, and I said, "I got a good idea." So I would come back with an idea, and then would play with that. Then Ed would go home, and Ed would come back with a better idea. So we'd play with that. Then I'd go home, and I'd come back with a better idea, and then Ed would go home and come back with a better idea. And this went on for quite some time, and we actually had a lot of fun with it, and developed a pretty close relationship. So I think we had we developed a antenna that actually would work pretty well. And this is the antenna range at Boeing in Wichita. And all of this, I don't know if it had to do with selling everything to Spirit or what, but except for the building, that the building structure is there, everything else is gone. The towers that we mounted stuff on, everything is gone. I saw some pictures of it, and it's really kind of sad because there were a lot of good people working there. We did a lot of good work, and this is all gone. Of course, the systems now, you don't really need this low frequency sensor as well, because it was very difficult to implement. And as you know, if you got any background in this, you know that it's really hard to get a good fix on these lower frequencies because you have reflections, and it's hard enough to make the sensor really accurate. I mean, I felt we could have got the thing fairly close, but we're still working with antenna patterns, so you really don't know. But it was an interesting project. Of course, now you would just have somebody, you would send a reconnaissance drone over. You would see that you had the target you wanted to take out. You would get coordinates on it. You would put it in GPS, which didn't exist back then when we were doing this, at least not operationally. But you would put it in the GPS coordinates, and you'd tell the thing, "Hey, go take this out." So the problem is solved in a different manner than the method we had to solve it, which is kind of the thing about how engineering works. You sometimes the way you're going after a problem, you have a lot of problems with it, but that technology just doesn't work out, and you have a better way of doing it, and then you implement that technology. Okay, so for my electrical engineering friends, that's the story. And like I said, a lot of people ended up. This was a temporary situation for me. A lot of people ended up being engineers who may have wanted to be pilots and stuff, because I hear from you on that, and they couldn't do it. And other people just do engineering because it's fun. I mean, that's what I went to school for. And this was very, very interesting. And this was just one of a multitude of projects I worked on that were just, it made you want to come to work every day because it was just so much fun. And frankly, I miss it. I play with ham radio, but that's not the same. We don't have as nice a toys as we could get when I was doing military projects, as you can probably imagine. Anyway, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it.